most of them will be in Massachusetts, but I know we have at least 2 in Maine. Let's see, we got Marblehead, Waltham, Brookline, North Reading. Awesome, this is great. And that means that you can hear me, which is my next question. Newton, Concord, Mass, Newton, North Reading. Standish, Maine. All right, there's one out of state. Good. South Portland, another out of state. I believe there's someone coming from Virginia. Waltham, Newtonville. Excellent. I'm in Boston. I'll type in Boston. Excellent. And okay, so we've got, there we go, VA, someone in Virginia. Lizzie's in VA. Hello, Lizzie. Great. So it looks like we have most people here, maybe 1 or 2 others that we're waiting for. We've got Lexington, Cambridge. Excellent, excellent. So this will be a lot of fun. This is gonna be really interesting. This is kind of a selfish tasting for me because we drink a lot of these wines from the Southern Rhone, and we sell a fair amount of them. And it's rare that I have this many of them next to each other at the same time. So it's a really good exercise in trying how they're tasting, how they taste together, how they're the same, how they're different, because they're all grown within, not that far of each other. But as you can see, if you've smelled or tasted any of them yet, there's a wide range here. Great. So I think we're at, great. That is 36 attendees. I think some people are together. So I think we can get started. That's wonderful. Thank you for all being on time. We've got Ted, Frank. Yep. We've got Cambridge, Medfield. Excellent. Wonderful. So I'm going to share my screen. We'll be tasting from 5 different winemakers today. There we go. 5 different winemakers, 3 different towns, 3 different terroirs. We're starting with Séguret, and then we're going back and forth between Châteauneuf-du-Pape and Gigondas. But all of the wines will be coming from the Southern Rhone Valley. So here's France, Paris up here, Burgundy, which is, if you've done these tastings with us before, you'd probably recognize most of the wines we have, or half of the wines in our portfolio, from Burgundy. So Burgundy's this red area here. 2 weeks ago, we did a Northern Rhone tasting, which was this skinny sliver right here. And now we're doing the Southern Rhone. So the Southern Rhone is all the way down here. And you can see it stretches just about down to the Mediterranean Sea. So we're really in the very south of France, down near Marseille. Avignon is the kind of cultural capital of the region. And Châteauneuf-du-Pape is about 20 minutes north of Avignon. And that's kind of the most famous appellation, wine growing appellation in the region. Great. So let's get started. The first wine is a really interesting, so here's a blow up of where we'll be tasting. We're starting over here on the right side of the map with wine number 1 in Séguret. We're going over to Châteauneuf for number 2. Back to this side for Gigondas, number 3, Châteauneuf for number 4. Whoops, no, I have mixed those up. So don't pay attention to the numbers on this one, but we'll be going back and forth between Châteauneuf and Gigondas. No, that's right. Back to Châteauneuf, or Gigondas for 4, Châteauneuf for 5. In any event. Okay, so the first wine is from Nicolas Aini, who's actually a Swiss. He's Swiss, his family is Swiss, but they've made wine in the Southern Rhone Valley for a long time. He's the 2nd generation winemaker. His father and his parents owned the Domaine de Cabas, which is a pretty well-known winery and hotel and kind of agro-tourism spot in Séguret, in the same town where he is now. But they sold that maybe 10 years ago or so, and he has started his own winery with new vines, so he planted them himself, or planted them new himself. And so this is a brand new domain, and I think it's the 2013 was the first year that it was that he produced any wine. So it's relatively new. Let's see. This is Nicolas himself. He splits his time between Switzerland and France, and has has some people that work on the ground for him in France. He's back and forth, and it's not terribly far if you're over on the Southern Rhone. It's a couple-hour drive up to Switzerland. His vineyard is really interesting. So it's in Séguret, which is one of these towns. I'll go back to this map. It's on the right side of this valley. So if you can see right here along the right side of this map, these are the foothills of the Alps, and they're quite steep pretty quickly here. And so these are, gently sloping things. There's a long plain here, and then Châteauneuf-du-Pape has its own kind of hilly terroir. But so there's a large flat plain, and then just before you get to the really steep stuff, there's kind of gentler hills here, and that's where Gigondas and Séguret, the wines on this side of the valley that we'll be tasting today, are from. And he created this vineyard essentially from scratch. It was the side of a hill that had no vines at all, and they cleared it and then made these really interesting looking terraces that are built into the hillside at a particular angle to minimize erosion and have the perfect amount of drainage. They kind of used pretty modern technology to design how these vineyards would be set up. So it's a highly engineered way of designing a vineyard, because usually you don't get to do that. His style, on the other hand, is much lower intervention. So he does, it's a completely biodynamic and organic atmosphere. And this picture is from earlier on, but you'll see there's grass and herbs and flowers and bees and lots of things in between the vines. It's a really very organic, very kind of garden-like atmosphere, and his style is very much organic. This is from 3 or so years ago, so you can see the grass is kind of filled in here. It's a beautiful spot, and the other really interesting thing to know about it is that it's high in elevation. As you can see, there's a really nice view across the valley from where this vineyard is, and the elevation means that he gets a lot of airflow through there, a lot of wind, which keeps the grapes nice and clean. It helps them avoid becoming too moist and having mold or other things plague them. But it also means that they don't ripen quite as much because it's a little cooler, a little higher up. And so he's able to preserve freshness. And we really think of him as a winemaker that, in a region that is known for kind of big, rich wines, and in an era where wines are just getting bigger, warmer, and richer and fuller, he, because of the way he farms and because of where he is able to preserve the freshness in his wines. And so the wines all have this really nice tension, really nice balance. They're not enormous, big, rich wines. And you'll see, I think, after you taste this, why we put it first, because it's a little lighter in weight, a little more refreshing. It's still, it's still Grenache and Syrah. It's still a dark, rich wine, but not nearly as big and bold and smooth, I think, as you'll see with the rest of it. So I'm gonna stop talking for a second, and we can taste this. So you can see there's a nice kind of floral note to the wine. This is 60% Grenache, 40% Syrah. Usually it's 70-30. I'll explain more a little later. In 2017, there was a big problem with the Grenache flowering in the spring. They had a storm after the Grenache flowered, and it knocked a lot of the flowering didn't take place the way it usually does. So most 2017s from the Rhone Valley have a much lower percentage of Grenache than usual, because the crop was down 50 or even 70%. So you can see the wine has in the mouth, it is dark, it's full, it has kind of that dark Southern Rhone berry jammy fruit, but it isn't soft in a way. There's kind of a nice mouth-watery quality to it. There's a kind of a tension in it. Not particularly tannic, although it is on the younger side, but there's just a kind of a tension and a naturalness to the wine that doesn't make it, it's lively. It's lots of energy, lots of tension, and kind of it's clean, but there's a nice earthiness to it too that I think is a hallmark of natural wines, or the style that he makes. He also makes a Côte du Rhône, which is a step down from this. This is the Séguret village level. Yeah, there's kind of a brightness of the fruit that I think after you taste the others, it will stand out. He's able to keep his wines relatively low in alcohol. In the Southern Rhone, because of the heat and because of the early harvest that they've had over the last 10 years, the alcohol levels have really gone up quite a bit. And because he's in this spot he picks pretty early, and because he is in this nice, elevated area, you can see here, he's able to retain freshness in his wines, which is trickier to do every year. Okay, so I'm going to move on to number 2, and I encourage you to go back and forth between these two, and really the first 3 will kind of pick up. We'll think of it in the same flight. So with wine number two, we're going across the valley over to Châteauneuf-du-Pape. And Châteauneuf-du-Pape is one of the more famous appellations in France, actually, and it's particularly well known. It's certainly the best known appellation in the southern Rhone Valley. It was made particularly famous by Robert Parker in the 1990s. It was famous before then, but it gained a lot of publicity from Parker, who was able to kind of transform the style of the region. He was, for those of you who don't know him, he's a wine critic. I started the Wine Advocate back in the 90s. He had a huge amount of influence in the 1990s. His style has become a little bit out of fashion. So he doesn't quite have the cachet that he once had. I think people don't think of him quite as the devil that they once thought that he was. But his style was, kind of at the very big, rich, dark, intense end of the spectrum, low tannin, rich, big wines that people have kind of moved away from a little bit. All right, so this is Châteauneuf-du-Pape from Christophe Mestre. Usually, as I said before, it's about 70% Grenache, but he had a horrible year of Grenache in 2017, as everybody did. So this is actually only 30% Grenache, and so there's a lot more Syrah in this wine than there usually is. In the Southern Rhone, the tradition is to blend grapes, usually Grenache, Syrah, Mourvèdre, Cinsault, Carignan. There's actually 13 grapes that you're allowed to grow in the Southern Rhone, but usually Grenache, Syrah, and Mourvèdre are the three that comprise most of the wines. So you can see the mouth, it's much bigger. It's kind of softer. There isn't quite the same tannin, or a slightly different tannic structure. It's an interesting, this is kind of a, Châteauneuf-du-Pape is typically a wine that you can age for a very long time. Mestre makes his wines to age for a little less time, to drink a little sooner. He de-stems them all, so he takes the stems out of them, which I'll talk more about when we get into the other three wines. When you harvest the grapes, you can either let the grapes ferment with just the grapes, or with the grapes and the stems that the grapes grow on. And so using stems changes the character of the wine, so you end up with more tannin. It gives a little bit more grittiness and a little bit more structure. It helps it age for a little longer. But Mestre's wines, because he's trying to make them to drink younger, he uses all de-stemmed grapes, so he takes all the stems out, and he doesn't soak them for all that long, meaning he doesn't let the juice soak on the skins for all that long, relative to some other producers. So it's a wine that is, it's Châteauneuf-du-Pape. It's still big and rich and soft, and round, and there's a lot of substance there, but it's not a wine that's very tannic, or that's very, that is designed to go for another 20 years, which some are. I have a comment, seems rather floral too. Yeah, I actually think the floral note in this wine is more because of the Syrah than the Grenache. And the Syrah is kind of an unusual, his cuvée is usually, like I said, 70% Grenache. And so this one in the Syrah is usually only, 8 or 10%. So with the Syrah being all the way up to 30%, it adds a little bit more of a kind of a darker blue fruit and a little bit of floral note to the wine. And there's a pleasant kind of, I don't know, the grapes, it feels sun-baked, and kind of, you can smell that kind of sunny Provençal atmosphere, but not in a hot way. There's, it's certainly rich, but it's not like, it doesn't feel heavy to me. Yeah, and there's kind of a length in the mouth, and it's pretty intense, but not, I don't know, in kind of a complete way. I wouldn't say this wine has too far to go to reach where it's going to be. And we've had wines from him in a more classical year that have aged, 5, 10 years out. But by 10 years, really maybe by 6 or 7 years, they're starting to kind of lose their fruit, and some people prefer that. But a lot of people, when you're looking for a Chateauneuf to kind of match the secondary aromas and the fruit receding, um, for him the window is earlier, I think, than most Chateauneuf. Great. So we've got, let's see. This is Christophe Mestre here. He only makes the one, it is a traditional domain in that he only makes one cuvee each of red and white. And actually both of the Chateauneuf du Pape that we have here today are like that. It's kind of in style now to make different cuvées of different Chateauneufs, you know, some with more oak, some from just Grenache, or some from different blends. But the original way that they used to do it and the way that he does it is just one cuvee of red, one cuvee of white, all from different parcels all over Chateauneuf du Pape. So you can see here he's in these very famous terroir that Chateauneuf is known for, called the galets roulés, which are these huge stones that sit right on top of the ground. It's kind of amazing. They look like they were, you know, trucked in there from somewhere for a movie set. But it's really, you know, it's the way that they are. And in some places, and I think I have a picture later on, they go several meters deep of just these stones. And what they do is they kind of mediate the temperature swings. In the southern Rhone, particularly in the summer, it can be extremely hot in the daytime and then quite cold in the nighttime. And so these stones kind of trap some heat for the night and then prevent the ground from getting too hot during the day. And so they kind of mediate the large temperature fluctuations. And here you can see a slightly sandier plot. And this is, let's see, this is, I believe this is Syrah, although it's quite old Syrah. Maybe it's Mourvèdre. Maybe it's Mourvèdre. This is going to be Syrah because it's on the wires. You'll see Grenache is very you can tell it's Grenache because it grows right out of the vines, right out of the ground, without any wires, because it's kind of a hardier trunk to the vine. Okay, so then we'll do wine number 3, and then we'll take a pause. We can go back through these. Excuse me. Okay, so we're going back across the valley, back to Gigondas, and Gigondas and Séguier are right next to each other. So we're now going towns that are quite close together, with wines 1 and 3. But I think you'll see there's quite a difference in the style between these wines. So this is from the Clos du Joncat, and they're a brand new producer for us, or they're 2 years old now that we've been importing from them. And they have a very interesting style. It's completely biodynamic and organic, and actually even kind of lower intervention than Aini, the first producer. It's very much, you know, the way wine was made 100 years ago. They don't do any fining or any filtering. They don't own any oak barrels, not even a single big traditional Rhone size oak barrel. Everything they do is in these huge concrete enameled vats. They do 100% whole clusters, so they don't take any of the stems out of their vines or out of their fermentation tanks, which is the way that the wine used to be made. And really everything that they do is kind of to have as little intervention between taking the grapes from the vineyard and putting them in the bottle. And that's kind of their ethos. So they are biodynamic and organic, and have been for quite a long time. And this is the winemaker, Dany Chastain, and she and her sister, Carol, are the 2 winemakers, and they are the 3rd generation at this domain. So their grandfather is the one who planted most of the vines, or who acquired most of the vines. So you see in the nose, it's very dark. This one we're back to 80% Grenache. So this is pretty heavily Grenache. Even in 17, they had enough Grenache that they were able to they make several different cuvées from other places too. There's an intensity in the nose in this wine that isn't, I wouldn't say, isn't in the other 2. It's kind of darker and maybe a little spicier, even though there's no Syrah in this wine at all, actually. But there just seems to be a little bit more of a kind of pepperiness. And in the mouth, there's more fruit and more tannin. Yeah, and the tannins, you can see a little bit of that tannin is because this is young and because they extract it for a little longer. but the other part of the tannin is the stems. And you can get that kind of a little bit of chewiness in the texture of it. And these wines actually age particularly well. I would say they probably even age a little longer than the Chateauneuf we just had. You can see with all that intensity and boldness and depth and the tannic structure that they really do, they would be able to age age for longer. And you can kind of picture, down the road, the fruit would recede a little bit, but wouldn't, the fruit hangs on because there's so much of it, and because there's so much tannic structure in this too, the fruit hangs on for a while. We have a question, no Syrah, number 3. What is the other 20? It's a good question. There's at least Mourvedre and Cinsault. I think it's Mourvedre and Cinsault. I think I think it's 80 Grenache and then 15 Mourvedre or so. And then, in the Rhone, they have this funny thing where they when they're describing what grapes are in the wine, they never fill in the last 3 or 4%. And it's because they just, everyone has a plot of 8 vines of this random old grape that, no one really grows anymore, but it's 100 years old and their grandfather planted it, so they're not going to pull it up. So it's kind of a running joke that we have when you taste wines from the Rhone, you only know what's in about 96% of it. And the rest of it are these odd things that they, it's kind of the ... on the end of their tasting sheets. They just don't fill it in because they would have to name 6 other esoteric, unusual grapes at the end of their blend. So mostly Grenache and Cinsault, and a little more Mourvedre in this. Question, how does this differ from the Vauqueyras? Good question. So they also make a Vauqueyras, which is the next town down. The Vauqueyras has a little bit less depth than the Gigondas. There's a similar kind of dark, intense, jammy fruit, but it doesn't quite have the depth. It's kind of dark, but on a shorter. It persists more. It leaves the mouth more quickly. It's probably a little bit more tannic and a little less elegant than this. This has kind of a silkiness that the Vauqueyras doesn't have. The Vauqueyras, I would say, is a really nice kind of slightly hardier version of this. But both of them are pretty nice. This is the town of Gigondas. If any of you, when any of us is allowed to travel again, I highly recommend going to the south of France. We would be happy to make introductions to any of these wineries, but in particular, the town of Gigondas and the towns around on the Châteauneuf-du-Pape is lovely and is set up kind of as a wine tourism destination. So it's a little bit more prepackaged, the kind of tasting experience you get there. In Gigondas and on the other side of the valley, it's very much, they're set up for visitors, but it's not really the point of what they do. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful place to visit for wine tourism. You can kind of walk into these places. It's not like Burgundy, where they produce so little wine that they don't even have a sign on their door. They don't really want any visitors. In the Rhone, they're always happy to invite people in. You have a little bite to eat, and they'll let you taste through the wines. It's a very friendly place to go tasting, and particularly outside Châteauneuf-du-Pape. They just have no pretension at all about the wines that they're making. And so when we're all allowed to travel again, put the south of France on your travel list. Yeah, there's a depth in this wine. It's interesting to go back and forth between this and the Mestre, the Chateauneuf. The Mestre seems a little bit more, fruit seem a little more candied, a little bit more floral. They're kind of redder, higher fruits, so kind of darker, more purple, bluer fruits in the Gigondas. The Mestre seems very complete to me today. It seems very kind of, I wouldn't be afraid to age it for a while, but it's awfully pleasant today in terms of, fruit being very approachable, relatively low in tannin, a really nice kind of mixture of the noses. But yeah, it's so much smoother in the mouth than the Gigondas. The Gigondas just has texture and kind of structure that the Mestre doesn't have. Yeah, it's very interesting. That's a good, it's more than just the stems working there, but you can see it's a good explanation of how stems and kind of longer soaking will affect the two different wines from pretty similar areas, particularly because traditionally the Châteauneuf-du-Pape would be a denser, meatier wine than the Gigondas. Okay, I've got a poll for you, I believe. So just favorite of these first three, and actually I shouldn't leave the Malmo out. Yeah, particularly after those other two, the Malmo just seems kind of has some lift to it. That, you know, if you're eating a stew is not maybe what you're looking for, or if it's a, you know, 4 degrees outside and you're looking for something warm, but it has a nice tension and kind of energy to it that the other two I don't think have. In any event, let me pull this up here, and you guys can vote. All right, so we'll do a poll. The first poll is just which of the first three was your favorite. Okay. We've got some people voting here in the chat. We've got 3 so far, 3, 2, then 3, then 1. And this is good because I realized the other day that you guys can't see the horse race here as it's all coming in, so there's no peer pressure. So no one's going to be herding to what everyone else thinks. You get to answer. I think you can't see. I don't think you can see what. Maybe someone correct me if you can see what people are voting for as they're voting. All right, just about everybody's in. Okay, you guys can't see. All right. All right, I'm going to end the poll here. And so we've got the Gigondas is the winner, but we've got votes for all 3. 4 votes for the Segure, 10 votes for the Mestre, and 23 for the Gigondas. The Gigondas is an overwhelming favorite. I kind of agree with you there. I know it that this is why we're really excited about this producer. They're brand new, and there's just a density in the wines. It's funny, we when we first tasted with them, we kind of assumed, oh, I didn't share them. Oh yeah, I did share them. So they're shared here. For those of you that can't see, depending on the device that you're on, you may not be able to see the results, but I'll read them out again. Segure, 4 votes for the Segure, 10 votes for the Mestre, and 23 votes for the Gigondas. When we first tasted with the Jonca, the Gigondas producer, we were just kind of astonished there wasn't any Syrah in the wines, because they have kind of a texture and a complexion, a kind of dark, you know, blue fruit complexion that makes me think of Syrah. And in the Rhone, as you see, you can get some wines with a fair amount of Syrah in them. But I just thought it was very interesting that they're able to kind of achieve this texture and dark, dense, elegant, you know, kind of boldness without being heavy. And, you know, wines aren't flat. They have no Syrah in them at all. It's all from very old fine Grenache. And that's the other thing I actually should say. Part of the difference in these vines, Mestre's vines, they're kind of average around 30 or 40 years old, 35, 40, yeah. Jonca's vines are much older. So some of them are over 100 years old. They average more like 80 years old. And as vines age, their production goes down, and the quality of the grapes goes up. So you get fewer grapes out of each vine, but you end up with much more intensity within the grape, and it's generally thought the quality of the grape is better. So you can also apply that to Nicolas Malmo, whose vines he started making them after they were 10 years old. So they're, you know, not even 20 years old yet. So really, you know, I think Malmo's vines I'm very excited to taste Malmo's vines as they continue to age, and as they, you know, as their yields go down. And he's very careful with his yields. He prunes them back so they're not, you know, producing tons and tons of you know, not super high quality grapes. But still, you know, they're very, very young vines. The quality just isn't the same as you would get in really old vines. All right, so we'll move on to the next 2, 4 and 5. Okay, so 4 and 5, we're gonna stay in Gigondas. So going back and forth actually between 3 and 4 should be an interesting comparison, because 3 is Gigondas from Jonca, and 4 is Gigondas from Florence. It's a little bit of a tricky comparison, because these are not the real comparison. I suppose if we were doing this, and what we almost did, was to compare the Domaine Les Goubert's regular Cuvée Gigondas with the Jonca regular Cuvée Gigondas. This is Goubert's luxury Cuvée Gigondas, so it's a style that is in a different in a very different, well, you'll see. It's a different style entirely. So Goubert is a producer that is one of the producers we've been working with for the longest. They are a wonderful family. The Cartiers is the name of the family. And Florence is, here's Florence. So she was born in 1986, and they started making, her father and mother started making this wine in 1986 in honor of her. That's called the Cuvée Florence. She is now grown up. She's 30, what does that make her, 34 now. And she's the winemaker. And she is really I think the wine was always good at Goubert, but I think she's really turned up the quality quite a bit. Very much in keeping with the style of the domaine. She hasn't remade the entire, you know, she hasn't reinvented the domaine, but she's really kind of tightened up the ship a little bit and made it so they're more, the wines are a little more consistent. I think they're better made, and she's also happened upon, for her first couple of years, a series of really, really good vintages in the Southern Rhone Valley. So if you taste this, before I keep talking, put your nose in it, you'll notice, I think, a note that isn't in the first three, and if you get to 5, isn't in 5 as well. And that note is oak. And so this is the only wine of any of these wines, any of these 5, that has any new oak. And new oak means that it's raised in oak barrels. In particular, Goubert raises this particular wine in small Burgundy-sized oak barrels, which hold 300 bottles of wine apiece. So in the Rhone, the tradition was to make these enormous barrels called foudres, which hold, I forget how many bottles, but they're 4 or 5 times what a small Burgundy-style barrel would make or would hold. Jean-Pierre Cartier, Florence's father, started, when he made this cuvée, he started aging it in small oak barrels because they were always fans of Burgundy and how Burgundy wines were made. And so it was kind of just an experiment, and it caught on. And actually in Châteauneuf-du-Pape, a couple of years later, the style also caught on, and it was kind of what they turned into their luxury cuvées. So that kind of spice, somewhat vanilla-y note, although I have to say, I don't know. So when we opened these at 10, 10 or 11, and it's now 4:30, and the oak note was a lot louder at 10 in the morning. Might have been that it was 10 in the morning, but usually that's the case with this wine. When you open it, the oakiness kind of is overwhelming, and as you let it give some air, it kind of melds into it. So I would say, if your cuvée has some oak and you don't like it, or you think it's too much oak, it's out of balance, just keep doing this, keep swirling it, and it should eventually get there. Oak is kind of a controversial topic among Southern Rhone winemakers. Some of them use new oak, some of them don't. Some of them use it for some cuvées, like Goubert. I think for me, this is an example of new oak in kind of a new modern way, but done very well. There's a question that I just got in the Q&A about, will number 4 age well? And the answer is absolutely. This wine ages magnificently well. And in fact, I've had 20-year-old bottles of this wine that are remarkably good. And that's kind of the idea behind this wine. The Gigondas, the regular Gigondas, is, kind of intense, but not in a spiced way, and doesn't nearly have the depth and doesn't have any oak the way this one does. So there's a question about new oak or what? So good question. New oak means that the wine is in barrels that have never been used before. So when you use a barrel, when you make a barrel, you toast the inside of it with fire, which I should do another tasting on later. It's really an interesting, very interesting process. But they light a fire on the inside of it, they toast it, and then you age the wine in it. And then for the first year that you use it, it is a new oak barrel. The second year you use it, it's what's called an old oak barrel, or a barrel of 1 year. And people use barrels for several different years, several consecutive years. And every year you use a barrel, the first year you use it, it imparts a lot of oak flavor. The second year it imparts way less, and it kind of slowly tails off to essentially no oak flavor. as you continue to use it, the little bits of oxygen come in and out of the pores of the wood and help the wine develop while it's maturing in the barrel, and that's just called microoxygenation. So you'll see a lot of people that use old oak and no new oak. This wine is 50% new oak and 50% old oak, and it's actually also 50% Syrah and 50% Grenache. So 50-50 of a lot of it. Okay, so we've got, anyone else notice barnyard? No barnyard for me. Fave so far, no barnyard for me. Don't understand why this tastes so much better than the Jean Cagillon. It's like the best of the first three combined. Good. I'm glad, because this was the one that I was almost didn't put in this lineup because I wasn't sure how, because it's such a different style than the first three, and then when we get back to four, it's just the oak. The oak is kind of a wild card that you throw into it, and if you hit it right, and if they do it right, which I think they have here, it really is it can be a wonderful thing, and it kind of melds into the fruit beautifully. If you do too much oak, as you'll see in a lot of kind of inexpensive wines from around the world today, if the only thing you're tasting is oak, then it's really not, for me, what I'm interested in doing. So we've got my favorite so far, and then we have my least favorite so far. Good. This is great. This is exactly what I was hoping. Yeah, in the mouth, so there's a lot of density in the mouth, actually. And it's interesting. It's very interesting to go back and forth between the Jonca, I think, which has an entirely different profile of density. Goubert uses no stems again. So like number three, or like number two, the Mestre and the Goubert are made in a similar method. So Florence isn't like a super interventionist, but they very much are classical winemakers in the classical, as in like conventional of the last 30 years sense. So they do a little bit of fining. They don't do any filtering, but they don't use any stems, and it's a much more of a conventional style of winemaking. The world in the last 20 years has moved towards a lower intervention style, and Goubert is kind of not in that. So 1, 3, and 5, as you'll see, will be more of a low intervention style, and 2 and 4 will be kind of a more conventional style. And we're splitting hairs here. This isn't, it's not, I wouldn't say we're splitting hairs. We're making generalizations here. These aren't perfect comparisons with all these, but I think it's really interesting to see the difference, the difference in in how the styles kind of come out. Yeah, I think this is very interesting. All right, so we've got some comments here. Least favorite, number 2 has opened up. Despite the oak, this is far richer than the others. Yeah, so good question for 17. So this is the only 15. It's 15. This is the 15 because this is the current release from them. They hold this wine in oak for 2 years. Spends 2 years in oak barrels before they release it. So they've just released it, and actually they hold it in bottles for a while after that too. So that's why we're tasting the 15 of this. This is great. We've got some most favorite and least favorites, which means that everyone is able to taste these without any kind of bias behind them, which is great. For me, this is really interesting because it's the one that stands out the most because of the oak, and because of the kind of conventional winemaking. I prefer to drink this style of wine, and this is very much just my personal preference, a couple years further on than this is. This for me is a little bit too much oak, but it is awfully hard to argue now that it's been open for 6 hours with, and the oak has kind of not hit you over the head the way it did at 10 this morning with my coffee. The oak, and I will tell you actually that the oak really does recede in this wine. They've been making it the same way. Every time we taste it from the barrel, it just seems like all you're tasting is wood. And then every time we taste it, when it gets in the bottle, it seems a little too oaky. And then every time we taste it 5 years after that, it's just magnificent. And I think Jeff is on here. Jeff has been buying this wine, I think probably since it was made. And it's really interesting because it's a style of wine that is not a la mode today. It's not a wine that's in vogue. but it is awfully hard for me, at least, to argue with it when it tastes like this at this point, and when I know what it's going to taste like eventually. Yeah, and there's a fineness in the tannins of this wine that it's kind of that's interesting. The Jonca, the number 3, has kind of a yeah, the tannins seem a little bit more rustic and a little younger. They obviously are 2 years younger, but they seem a little less kind of knit together than the Goubert. So I think that them releasing this 2 years late, 2 years later, does the wine quite a bit. If they could release it even later than that, I think I probably would tell them they should. But anyway, I'm glad that we've had widely disparate reactions to this wine. That was kind of what I was hoping. Okay, so before we get to the last one, yeah, and these actually are, this is the picture that's behind me. These are Grenache vines. And you can see they come right out of the ground. They don't have any stakes or anything on them. They're really, really cool looking vines. These look like they're pretty old too. Okay, so while I am thinking of it, please take your phone out and take a picture of your tasting setup. I'll take a picture of mine too, just so we can see. We can't all be together, tasting together like we usually would be on the Saturday before Thanksgiving. We'd usually be tasting at the depot, but it was nice to see a lot of you guys today. And if you would take a picture of where you are and send it to me, I'll type my phone number into here, or you can respond to an email too. And then I'll compile these and put them on the page for the site. Great. Okay, so we're going to move back to Chateauneuf-du-Pape for an entirely different style. So it was really funny. We discovered Pierre-Andre, this producer, 5 or 6 years ago. They're a relatively well-known biodynamic source in Chateauneuf-du-Pape. And we discovered them, or we got an audience with them because of an introduction from the winemakers at Mas Foulaquier, which is one of our, some of you guys will recognize the producers. Mas Foulaquier is one of our Languedoc producers, and they're completely biodynamic and organic, and they knew of these guys from the kind of French biodynamic winemaking circles that they both run in together. So we discovered, we got our intro from these guys for these. And then 2 years ago, when we discovered the Clos du Jonca, number 3, at the end of the tasting, we said, we love your wines. They actually kind of remind us of this woman who makes this beautiful Chateauneuf-du-Pape that we buy wine from, the Domaine Pierre-Andre. And the woman who made the wine at Clos Jonca said, oh, we're very good friends, Jacqueline, Andre, and us. So you can understand why they get along, because they make similar style wine. Here, someone's saying, please post the phone number again. I'll say it out loud too. It's 215-498-0189. I'll put it back to there. Okay. So now we're moving back to Chateauneuf-du-Pape. And with this producer, we're moving to very, very old vines and completely biodynamic and organic and very, very low intervention. So these guys were the first certified organic winery in Chateauneuf-du-Pape in 1980. They were the first certified biodynamic Chateauneuf-du-Pape winery in 1992. And their average age of vines is 68 years old, but they have some vines that are over 140 years old that are pre-phylloxera. And I'll just give a quick sidebar on phylloxera. Phylloxera was a root louse that devastated a lot of French vines. It ate them from below and caused them to die. And it was a real crisis in the French winemaking industry. They were actually saved by grafting French vines onto American rootstock, which is kind of a funny footnote of history, that a lot of the most famous wines in France are made from vines that were grafted onto American rootstock. However, these vines that you're looking at here, which are 140 years old, are in sandy soils, which you can see here, in which phylloxera, the root louse, could not survive. And so these are vines that were not protected, not that were protected from phylloxera by the sandy soils, and so they are pre-phylloxera. And there are a couple spots around France. Eventually, in the next 20 years, there will be none because they'll be just too old on their own. But these are some pre-phylloxera vines that are in this little field in this corner of Châteauneuf-du-Pape, with very, very sandy soils. So Jacqueline Andre is again, a producer that makes one red and one white, and is a fanatic about low intervention and taking care of, as she puts it, her vines. She refers to them as her grande dame, which is her old ladies, and in French, the vine is a feminine word, so she refers to them as the old ladies that she takes care of. And they really are. You can see here that they have to be, when they get this old, they are a little bit fragile, kind of like people, and they have to be tied to these stakes here so they don't blow over with the wind or with rain or with hail they get in this area. And so it's a lot of work to take care of vines that look like this and that are this old, and they actually really don't produce very many grapes, but the quality of the grapes they produce is remarkable. And they all go into the single cuvee that she makes, and so we can taste it now. This is another one of those wines where it's 80% Grenache, it's 10% Syrah, 8% Mourvèdre, and then the last two is just everything else. So in the nose, you can see this just has an incredible depth to it. There's no oak at all in this wine, or no new oak at all in this wine. The wine is aged in huge, uses half concrete, or maybe 2/3 concrete and 1/3 huge barrels, but none of it is new. And so she's really not trying to impart any oak flavor on the wine. She doesn't do any filtering. Oh boy, and the depth of this wine is just amazing in the mouth. Tannins are there. They're very kind of finely put together, but they're just silky smooth already. Wow, that's amazing. Kind of dense and dark, chocolatey, spicy stuff. This is kind of the style of wine that drew us to this domain. It's it's organic in that there's nothing that's kind of holding any of the spice and the notes and the earthiness back. But she's so careful about all of her winemaking, and all of the fruit that comes in is just perfectly clean and sorted. And her tasting room, or her cellar where she makes the wine, where we do our tasting, has to be the cleanest cellar you've ever been in your life. And it really does pay off. You end up with this wine that is just full of depth and intensity, but kind of in a subtle way almost. It's not kind of rich and bold and muscly. It's kind of dense, but velvety and soft and elegant. This wine also, we've only been working with her for 6 years, so we only have bottles in our cellar that are 6 or 7 years old. Or we've been working with her for 4 years. So we only have bottles that are 6 or 7 years old. But she's tasted us through wines that are quite a bit older, and they age just beautifully. She actually does do some, because she does so little intervention in the cellar, she does a little bit of fining. And fining is where you put something into the tank before it is. So filtering is what you think of with filtering. You process it through a filter, and it takes out some of the sediment, and it changes the texture a little bit of the wine. Fining is kind of a gentler version of that, where you put a substance on the top of the tank, and it kind of slowly percolates down and collects things. Then you pump the wine off of the top of it. And you can find with a lot of different agents. There's some purely synthetic chemicals that you can use to put on the top. In the past, people, centuries ago, people used bull's blood, actually, which would kind of go through the wine, and pull out the sediment and the particles and kind of descend to the bottom, and then you pump at the top. I can't imagine that apparently it doesn't affect the taste, but I have a hard time wrapping my head around that. I should get you a picture of Jacqueline, by the way. Here's Jacqueline Andre here with her Grand Dame. The other kind of classical way of fining is using egg whites. And now a lot of biodynamic producers will buy powdered egg whites. They'll sprinkle at the top of the tank and will kind of percolate through and catch some of the sediment, and then you pump off from the top of a cleaner version of the wine. Jacqueline, being Jacqueline, who's the winemaker here, doesn't use powdered egg whites. She uses actual egg whites. And so she's told us that for some years, when it has been what she thought she needed to do, she and her son and a couple of their friends have bought hundreds of dozens of eggs, cracked them all open, used just the whites, and put them on the top of the tanks and have them, percolate through, catch the sediment, and they pump it off. And we asked her what she does with the yolks, which was, I think anyone would ask. And she said that her friend down the street is the town's ice cream maker. And so he buys the yolks from her after she and her son and their friends crack these dozens and dozens and dozens of eggs just to get the whites. And then they give the yolks to the ice cream maker. So it's in France, nothing really goes to waste. So we've got don't like the smell, but like the taste. Interesting. Yeah, I can kind of get my head around that. The smell has kind of has an earthiness that hasn't been in the others yet. The taste, I think the texture of this wine is extraordinary. And this, again, is quite young to be drinking this wine. This is the 2017. I think people think of 2017 as a year that will age pretty well. Jacqueline opens the bottles that we taste with her during our tastings the night before to give them enough air, she thinks, to get them ready for a taste. So we have a 10 a.m. tasting. She'll open them at 5 the night before. They'll sit in her cellar open until the next morning, and then we'll taste them. Vine looks like an oak tree. I agree. I mean, it's incredible. And this is slightly distorted, this picture, because of the because of the way the picture is taken. But honestly, these are several feet high, these vines. They're just massive, massive vines. And they're in this wild, very, very sandy soil. And what's funny actually too is that because they are so old, they were planted before tractors, because in 1860 whatever it was, there weren't tractors, so they planted everything with a horse. And apparently these vines are not in lines that are straight enough that you can drive a tractor, so they have to do everything they do in here is by hand, because they practice most of their stuff by hand anyway, but you wouldn't be able to drive a tractor or any kind of machinery because it would clip off some of the vines if you did, because the lines of the vines are not straight because they did it by a horse, and I guess the person driving wasn't sober or thinking about something else. It's really interesting to go back and forth between these two Chateauneuf du Papes. I purposely didn't put them next to each other because I think they're so different. But I think now you definitely could go back and forth between the two of them. Yeah, totally different depth, totally different. Yeah, the Mestre still is kind of nice and fresh and kind of higher toned. The Andre is just kind of deep and full. It's also interesting to do the number 3 and 5 together too, because yeah, 3 and 5 are, these two friends that kind of make wine of a similar style. You can see that they have a similar style, but you can also see that they're working with different terroirs. For me, at least, the Chateauneuf has a noticeable amount more depth and kind of complexity than the Gigondas. Although I will say the Gigondas, we haven't done prices yet. We'll do those later. But the Gigondas really has a lot of depth for a Gigonesse. We've got great mix of wine. Seems like the Mestre is easier to drink now. Andre would age a bit better. Yeah, I think that's probably right. That makes sense to me. Okay, let's do some polls. And we'll see what you guys think. This is a picture. This is in someone else's vineyard in Chateauneuf, but I just had to take a picture of it because it's just remarkable. This is what a lot of this, I don't know who the first person that decided it was a good idea to plant vines in a landscape that looks like this. But this really is what they look like. They're just enormous, round, smooth rocks. And they're smooth, actually, because a couple million years ago, that was the bottom of an ocean that was, full of had waves washing over them. And so these are ocean smooth stones from millennia, millions of years ago. It used to be the floor of an ancient ocean, and now is home to some really good winemakers. Rocks are naturally there. Yes, this is the natural part, and this isn't all of Châteauneuf-du-Pape. It's quite a large appellation, actually. So there are parts of it that are very, very heavy to clay or very heavy to sand, and other parts of it are very heavy to limestone. But this is the kind of the famous terroir of Châteauneuf-du-Pape is these round. They're called galets roulés. And in fact, we tried once we tried to bring a few back. I brought a few back in my suitcase before in the plane. But one year we decided that we would kind of pick up little different earth samples from around France, and we'd give them to the last winemaker on our trip and we asked him to put them in a container when we bought from him in a case, in a cardboard case, and just put it at the bottom of the wine that we bought from them. And then at the last second, we decided that probably, I don't know, you're not supposed to bring soil samples back, obviously. So we decided maybe we'll just cancel that, and we told them to just get rid of it. And that exact shipment, those soil samples, that single box of very dense looking rocks on an X-ray, was the one and only time we've ever had an FDA full inspection of a container coming over from the US. And it was X-rayed and would have looked, real suspicious at the bottom of the pallet. So it's a good thing we didn't. All right, let me get these up here. So I'm going to stop sharing and oops. So we'll do a quick poll of the last two. Really, I understand apples and oranges is very hard, but preference between 4 and 5, between the Florence and between the Andre. So we've got, let's see. Impressed that neither Châteauneuf-du-Pape is hot. I agree, actually. I think they've done a really good job keeping these pretty fresh. I think the Andre has quite a bit of alcohol. I think it's probably over 15. I know the Jonca is over 15. And that's kind of part of the other side of the biodynamic ethos, is that they just kind of follow the the year. If the year is hot, they just make a hotter wine. But I think, for me, what this proves is that you can have a wine that is technically hot, that has technically a lot of alcohol or a lot of viscosity. But if you make it in a way that's balanced, then it has acidity and has a little bit, has freshness of fruit. It isn't a wine that's flat. It isn't a, hit you over the head 15%, flat, high alcohol wine. It's a wine that has definition and has kind of, depth to it, but not heaviness to it. Okay, so we'll end this poll. Question. Very close between 4 and 5 different styles. Yeah, I agree. It's hard to choose between these two. But, so we'll stop the poll here. So we'll share the results. We got 10 votes for Florence and the 27 for the Châteauneuf. Okay, and then I have some other fun polls for you. Okay, so this is painting again with a broad brush, but we'll just do style. If you had to pick a style, and I'm lumping these a little bit into styles, but we'll do 1, 3, and 5 as one style, the Jonca, or the Melmont, Jonca, and Andre, versus the more kind of classically interventionist 2 and 4 of the Mestre, Chateauneuf, and the Goubert Gigondas. And again, don't tell any of the winemakers this is how I'm pitching them. But this is, you know, just if we're gonna pick a style between these two, how are the two different styles showing today? We've got chose 4, but ask again in a few years. Yeah, I agree with that too, actually. I think I think several of these wines will age beautifully. And again, we're drinking all at 17. I picked 17. We actually have number 3 in 2016, which I think it has benefited from that. We have number 1. I think we have a little bit of number 1, a little older. Number 2, we don't have any older. Number 5, we have also in 2016. And I think you would see if you tasted these in 2016, the years, an extra, even one more year does a lot to it to help it develop. But I wanted to kind of keep it as consistent as I could. Okay, so prefer the non-interventionist, but I think the Florence is quite good. Yeah, I agree with that too. Okay, so we've got, I probably should have pitched conventional better than low intervention. I don't want to shame people into picking one or the other. So low intervention, 27 votes, and conventional, 8 votes. Great. A little bit of an unfair thing too, because we've got 3 options to pick for the first and 2 for the second. Okay, so we'll quickly do favorite overall of these 5, independent of price. Which is your favorite wine of the tasting? It is funny if you even if you just smell all 4 of them and then you smell the Florence, the number 4, the Gigondas, it just, the oak is, you know, if I've taught you anything in this tasting, it's how to identify what oak smells like. Okay, almost all the votes are in. We've got 1 vote for the Chateauneuf, or the Mestre, 6 for the Jonca, 9 for the Goubert, and an overwhelming favorite, the Andre. I can't argue with that too. We got both Gigondas, so 2 votes. Someone who wishes they could vote for both of the Gigondas. Great. Okay, so we'll do the last one. The last one will be with price included. So the prices on these are 29 for the Melmo, 34 for the Mestre, 34 for the Gigondas, 52 for the Goubert, and 58 for the Andre. So with those prices in mind, just out of curiosity, which do you think is the best value of the 5? Question, what is your sense of how the Andre, I think it might be a typo here, by 15, 16, 17. So the Andres is actually, all the wines of the Southern Rhone are more consistent than wines from Burgundy. If you've been on the Burgundy tastings, vintage-wise, they're more consistent from you know, year to year. They have some horrible years, but it hasn't been a horrible year in a long time in the Southern Rhone. So the wines fluctuate. You know, the character of the vintage changes them a little bit. 14 was kind of an outlier in the Southern Rhone. But 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, probably 20 are all going to be, you know, kind of on the warm end of the spectrum, but solid, really good years in the Southern Rhone. So for Andre, and I think Andre probably the 16s are bigger than the 17s. They're kind of denser and more kind of just tightly wound. If I was going to age one, I would age 16 over 17. 17 is just kind of a little bit more open, a little bit more kind of just silkiness early. The 16's kind of just a little bit more kind of wound up, not showing all their stripes yet. The 15s were beautiful, but I haven't had one in a while because we're all out of them. I wish I had saved more. Okay, so we'll end the poll and share the results. We've got another overwhelming favorite, the Jonca at $34 a bottle. I agree with you, that's a really good buy. Couple votes for the Andre, couple votes for the Mestre, couple votes for the Malmo. Excellent. Okay, so I think that may be all I have for you guys. We've gone a little over our hour. Apologize. But thank you all for joining. Oh yeah, one more thing. The last, we're doing one more tasting. Quick question, is climate change affecting the grapes? Yes. And in fact, Danny Chaston, the winemaker at Jonca, told us that in her lifetime, when she remembers when she was a little girl and her family was harvesting, if they were harvesting in early October and they could get to 13% alcohol, she said they were all excited because it was a good year. They wouldn't have to adjust the wines by chaptalizing or doing anything to beef them up, and they were happy with the ripeness if they could get to 13% and if they could harvest the beginning of October. Now, the harvest date is essentially moved 3 weeks earlier over a 100-day cycle. And if you can get a wine under 15% in the Southern Rhone now, they're excited about the balance. So yes, climate change has completely, in a generation and a half, morphed the style of the wines. What I think actually you're able to see from these wines is that if the people that are following the biodynamic and organic principles and are careful with how they're making the wines and how they're picking and how they're extracting, are able to preserve freshness even in wines that are technically high in alcohol and have a lot of heat to them, technically intense and rich. You still can end up with wines that have balance, that have what you're chasing, that are not heavy. They can be rich without being heavy, I guess I'd say. So the final tasting we're doing is 2020 tasting is Saturday the 5th, so 2 weeks from today. And we're doing just Premier Cru Red Burgundies, Premier Cru Burgundies, 2 white and 3 red. There's very little theme to this tasting. We're going to be doing 5 different producers, 5 different vintages, 5 different towns, obviously. We'll be all over the place, but the theme really should be that these should all be excellent. And I'm very excited to taste all of these, and I hope you guys will join them. So this is posted on the site. And then also, if any of these wines call to you guys, we're doing 15% off, and I'll send you the code in an email for any of these. Tell us anything about the wine you gifted us. Yes, actually, so the wine you guys all got, if you picked up today, for those of you that have been customers for a while know that usually the Saturday before Thanksgiving, which is this Saturday, is a wild and very happy tasting that goes way past the closing time at the warehouse in Newton. We obviously weren't able to do that in person this year, so we've given you guys a bottle of our favorite Thanksgiving wine, which is Beaujolais. Not particularly fancy, not particularly age-worthy, but wine that is juicy and fruit-forward and well-made and ready to drink now. And so you guys, if you picked up today, you got a bonus bottle of Cherubla, which is a Beaujolais cru that we're really, we love, and particularly in a year like 2019, which is really warm.